Porosity, it is. I'm over 60. I mean, you have to be under 15 to really feel this. The first aspect about porosity is that it deals with edges. And edges come in two forms, borders and boundaries. That happens in nature. The work I did with some of my students at MIT. The cell membrane is a border. It's porous, but it has, whereas a cell wall is not so porous. The thing about this is that porosity is just not free-flowing. A cell membrane is both porous and resistant. It tries to keep in the valuable ingredients in the cell and to exchange ingredients it doesn't need. The problem with the cell wall, as in this cellulose fibers that we looked at, is that no exchange is possible. So when we talk about porosity, we're not talking about openness in the sense that anything flows everywhere. We're talking about a very complex condition in nature. The same thing is true about ecological borders. This is another study we did in Provincetown, which is just off Boston. The places of greatest activity here, both biological and evolutionary, are where the water meets the land. Same thing about the layers of water in the ocean itself. It's at the edge where the most activity goes on in a natural. And a hedgerow, you'll all know this as a familiar example of something which is mixed in that way, and so is very alive, much more alive than the mown spaces around it. By contrast, this is my favorite slide of everything I show you. These are tiger dropping boundaries, and you know how they do it. They shit a set of warning signals here that this is for my group. No other tigers are allowed. Indeed, no other animals who know how to read these signals are allowed. Anyhow, so this distinction between borders and boundaries is fundamental in the natural world. It's also something that we can build. This is a photo I took of the Israeli security wall, which is the ultimate built boundary on one side. That's on the Israeli side. I couldn't get across the other side. The Israelis wouldn't let me go. But on the other side of this is a market made by Palestinians where they sell all sorts of things. You know, the wall in the morning offers them shade, and they have just this one little way to get through. But on the Israeli side, this is what I mean. This is a low intensity edge. It's a wall. Walls themselves can function as borders. This is one in Avignon. This is where Jews, prostitutes, and Germans, what a combination, all clustered. They weren't allowed in the city center. I make no more further comment on that. And as you've seen in the Ricky Burnett's original presentation to you, this is traffic is creating a border. Whereas this, in Sao Paulo, remember this town? This is what we took from that dizzying height, is a boundary. People can walk across this traffic. It's slow, whereas this is fast. And the edges are highly porous. You have to watch out because you're in Brazil, which means that your life is taken in your hands every time you get in the way of a bus. But it works as a border. This is, to me, the most profound kind of distinction between borders and boundaries we know. That is between the vertical and the horizontal. Everything above the ground plane here is isolated from it. Everything. And this is a huge problem in the making of almost all tall buildings. How do you make them porous up? We have some ideas about how to make them porous at the ground plane, by putting in lots of doors, by getting rid of security codes to get into an elevator and so on. There are lots of ways to do it. But porosity is inachievable for us in almost all vertical dimensions. Now, well, I don't want to talk about it. This is a project I did in East London. Another way of making something porous is by changing its function. And there's a parking lot project where it's a parking lot, but we poured tons of sand on it. So little kids are at the beach in this poor part of London. And to come back to this is a border in Mumbai. That is, lots of things happening both vertically and horizontally there. People are eating, their kids are upstairs whining or crying for mommy, who can go from ground floor up. It's also a space of production. And that's why I want to show you this. This is another kind of border in Mumbai. This is quite a frightening phenomenon. Does this thing work? Oh, yeah. The school, this is a block away from what I just showed you. The school for these kids crosses these train tracks. I don't know what your experience of Indian train schedules is. Yours sounds like yours very regular. Mine was that these are quite irregular. And these kids have to treat this as a dangerous, porous border to get to and from school, which they go back into day after day, hour after hour during the day. So it develops kind of street smarts environmentally. And finally, I'll just show you this. The opposition between a border and a boundary spatially is something that is a continuity. This is Bogota's version of Nehru Place. People here, they have a lot of things that have fallen off the back of the truck for sale, and they're selling them on overturned cardboard boxes. If they prosper, they move up a floor, and they're still dealing in semi-legal goods, but the floors are now organized like streets, and they have customers who come to where they're shopping. I suppose the salesman of my iPhone has regulars to whom my iPhone wouldn't be sold. Anyhow, it's a cluster here. If you get up to the top floor, they've actually built, they've taken 4x8 sheets of cardboard and created miniature stores up there. What you're looking here is vertically rising from the porous to the non-porous, from the informal to the formal. This is what physically social mobility looks like. Understand what I'm saying? This is, social mobility is not just a statistical fact. It's a physical experience. Now, I've mostly showed you things from non-Western countries. I'll just show you very quickly how one of my masters, Aldo van Eyck, dealt with the problem of porosity. This is a space in Amsterdam with this huge open traffic. So what he did is he filled it in. And what's porous about this is that people barrel down this street, and these little kids are playing at the edge. Like the kids in Mumbai, they have to learn the street smarts about where you go and where you don't go. That is, they have to become visually safe. Health and safety would have never allowed this in Britain to be built. You have to segregate those kids away. You have to do the equivalent of shut them up in a boundary. Whereas the Van Eyck notion is they're learning the city by being at a border edge. Here's another one of these. This is a beautiful one. And they're everywhere. And there's 700 of these he made in Amsterdam. They're all places of porosity. And the notion is that a porous city is a way in which you learn your city. So what I'd like to say about this, in sum, is that if the public comes to demand it, we, urbanists, can design a porous city. Like Nehru Place, these other visions entail opening up and blurring the edges of spaces so that people are drawn in rather than repulsed. They're dangerous, they're ambiguous. They emphasize true mixed use of public and private functions. In British terms, schools or clinics amidst Tesco or Pret. They explore the making of loose-fitting spaces which can shift in shape as people's lives change. I don't believe that in design determinism, but I do believe that the physical environment should nurture the complexity of identity. That's an abstract way of saying that we know how to make a porous city. The time has come to make it. Thank you very much.